Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Faisel and Friends. My name is Salomon, and I'll be your guest host today. Faisel has another big commitment and he has asked me to host for tonight, which is always a privilege and an honor. Dr. Dan, are you around?
Absolutely, Say. It's good to be with you this evening.
Hey, Dan. Happy holidays.
Absolutely. And this is a great topic for the holidays. I know I had a patient, one of my patients in the emergency department yesterday, and the doctor from the emergency department was very helpful. So this is a great topic.
That's great. One of the mainstreams of our model is making sure that our patients are aware that we are always watchful of their care, regardless of where they are. More so when they are getting care outside our centers and especially in emergency rooms. So I think this is a topic that is very close to my heart and my day-to-day role within ChenMed. And we have the privilege to have Dr. Adam Perry on the show today, and he's going to be walking us through what is that partnership with an ER physician looks like. What is the current state of an emergency room when treating with the older adults? And what are the different ways that we can strategize together to be able to care for our patient population? So I'm extremely excited, looking forward to learn a lot from Dr. Perry. Dr. Perry.
Dr. Dan, thanks for having me.
Hey, Adam. It's a pleasure to have you here.
I'm thrilled to be here. Happy holidays. I hope I come with a message of hope in a transition and a communication between PCPs and the emergency department that not always the most hopeful conversation. So I hope overall I'm going to shed some light and point towards a better future for communication and collaboration for our patients.
Which should be at the mainstay of the PCP patient relationship that's built around trust, but also in alignment and partnership when that care occurs outside of the center walls. Adam, you have a unique skill set that not a lot of doctors have. Can you just tell us a little bit what your background and your particular skill set?
Sure. So like our colleague Faisel, I trained in an unopposed family medicine program. And immediately thereafter, my interest was in rural underserved areas. And I worked as an emergency physician for several years and sort of halfway between Jackson, Mississippi and Shreveport, Louisiana, doing 84-hour shifts and really learning emergency medicine. And I went back to Pennsylvania and worked in emergency medicine for 18 years. What I realized is I was really doing emergency geriatrics. I was working community hospitals, and I was taking care of complex older adults without tons of resources. And I figured I'd try to learn what I was doing. And so I went back and did a geriatric fellowship and was fortunate enough to get involved in development and dissemination of a model called the Geriatric Emergency Department model. And so practiced emergency medicine, full boat, and then got into that model and realized that the other part of that is primary care docs. And so just so fortunate to be here and hope to help our PCPs advocate for their patients.
Wow, Adam. So you're a Geri ER doc. That is not very common.
That and $2 will get you a cup of coffee. You know what I mean? It's not, but it's not. They used to call me a unicorn. I was, the only person we know that did a geriatric fellowship and practiced full-time community ER. But hopefully this is hopefully I can lend some expertise that can help our patients. It's an unusual career path, to say the least.
But a well needed skill set, right? And the emergency room as you're overlooking the care of people that come in with acute illnesses, and sometimes that can be lost because within that because of just the dynamics of the emergency room, right? So I think it's important to we're going to try to shed some light on the importance of this partnership between a primary care physician and an ER. And an ER physician, and how to establish the next best steps early within the care of the patient to within the next level of care. So, Adam, taking a step back and looking at the state of the emergency room, right? The emergency room on its own is this, well-oiled machine. Walk us through, if I'm a patient or my family member comes in through the emergency room, how does that look like in any typical day? And how does that translate into, an older adult's experience in the emergency room?
That's a great point. I think it's a great place to start, because I like to say that the emergency department is part of the continuum of care, but I think it's a critically important part of the care continuum, clinically and both financially, because as we'll talk about in a moment, the emergency department makes that very critical admission decision, and the decisions and processes they make affect length of stay for patients who are admitted, and so that can be a little frustrating for primary care docs who have a little bit of who work in a value-based system. The ER doc's kind of in control of the purse in some way, and a massive part of the clinical outcome for our patients as well. But thankfully, a lot of the admissions are discretionary, and the ER docs want to talk to the PCPs to make the decision to send home if they can. How does that work, and what are the nuances of the emergency department, I think, as we start to develop a strategy and some real smart techniques? What I think I'm going to focus on today is really what's the highest risk group who really, really needs this care coordination. I'll talk a little bit about a slide that I put up, and then I'll talk a little bit about what happens when this patient population comes into the emergency department. So I sent a slide. Hopefully we can get it up. So this is, say you're very familiar with this. This is the trajectory of illness, chronic disease trajectory, and the important things here is on the y-axis is sort of level of activity or function, and on the x-axis or horizontal axis is time. And you'll see two horizontal bars. The first one there says IADLs, and the second lower one says ADLs. And the point of this slide in the context of this conversation is that older adults, with chronic illnesses, as you go forward in time, have multiple exacerbations, and each one of those dips is, say, a hospitalization or acute change in status. And an emergency department presentation often happens when an older adult falls below a certain critical level of function for their living environment. And then if you look on the far right, that shaded box, that's older adults with complex medical conditions and functional capacity below the level of independent living. So oftentimes these are people who need care at home, they're in a facility, and they're having frequent exacerbations without return to return to independent function. And that's the sort of population we're going to talk a little about and focus on today, because this is where repeated hospitalizations can really have some hazards. However, it's also where emergency department care is most potentially valuable, because older adults with complex medical problems often get quite sick and you're not sure why. They have atypical presentations. They're weak and they're dizzy, and that could be because they're weak and dizzy or because they've got sepsis syndrome. So long answer there, but setting the stage for the next part is what happens when an older adult like this comes in. Well, they come in by ambulance because they're functionally dependent. And oftentimes, the thing to think about is it's all about speed. So the ambulance will pick them up from wherever. Oftentimes, they'll draw labs. They'll land in the emergency department, and they get an encounter with a nurse. They'll hand off the labs. There'll oftentimes be a triage process that's triggered. This person had a fall, or this person had a change in mental status, and they might go right for CAT scan. The labs might be run right away. There's a pre-registration process that allows the labs to be done, but not necessarily run insurance. And I think for the purposes of this conversation, this incredibly efficient process enables the ER doc to walk into the room with the results of their CAT scan, their labs, some report from EMS, and make a disposition decision before the primary care doc even knows that the patient's in the emergency department. And that ER doc needs to make the decision about initial diagnosis and initial treatment plan, which as you know, sometimes changes if they're upstairs, but also now needs to make an admission decision, needs to make a disposition decision because they're on the clock. And that window between when that person lands in the ER and when that disposition decision is made is the most critical time period for our older adults, because the ED doc needs the PCP's information to make an accurate diagnosis, to make a goal concordant treatment plan. And if it's one of these hospitalizations that's potentially impactable, and we'll talk, there's an article that talks about variations in admissions. If it's an impactable admission, the ED doc needs to talk to the PCP, and they want to talk to the PCP. It's just not easy to do.